Over on BBC2, Paddy and Rosie are being let loose in 1 minute.
Saunders, Luke Littler, an epic celebrity game of darts and live performances from Mohan Rizwan and Paloma. Yes, they do. Thank you. Go turn over now. Turn over.
Well, we both like travelling a lot, so we watch
Race across the world.
Race Across the World.
It's weird. 4 celebrities from the UK race across the world.
We kind of related to that because there's a son and dad in it as well, and and they were saying things to each other that we said exactly the same.
Yeah, they're both kind of bond on travelling. It's a common interest.
Yeah, it kind of brings us together when we're watching something.
Yeah.
This game belongs to all of us. Man City v Newcastle.
Records are being shattered by the match.
And Chelsea v Leicester.
Oh, it's brilliant! Absolutely brilliant!
In the FA Cup quarter-finals.
Now it's the big boys.
Starts tomorrow at 5:10 on BBC1 and iPlayer.
This is BBC One now at 10 o'clock. The news with Reeta Chakrabarti.
Tonight at 10, voting in Russia's presidential election begins with gestures of defiance, but the outcome is not in doubt. Ballot boxes attacked and several people are detained for vandalism, but Vladimir Putin is seen as certain to win. At least 20 people are killed in southern Ukraine by a double Russian missile strike. More than 70 are wounded. The funeral directors in Hull at the centre of a police investigation. Officers say they've now identified all 35 bodies recovered.
An I report live from Haiti tonight, where national police say they're fighting to keep the country from sliding into anarchy.
And could salt water hold the key to stop sea ice from melting through climate change?
And on BBC London, warnings of travel disruption for drivers. For the first time in its history, part of the M25 will be closed for the whole weekend.
Good evening. Russians have begun voting in a presidential election which Vladimir Putin is certain to win when the polls close on Sunday. There have very unusually been some protests, such as this woman pouring dye into a ballot box. But President Putin faces no serious opposition, with his rivals dead, in prison or in exile. This report is from our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg.
Russia's democracy is the best in the world, the Kremlin says. And at polling station 38 in Moscow, we found a choice of candidates and plenty of voters. Democracy in action, right? Not quite. Realistically, only one man can win this.
Vladimir Putin!
The man who's been on Russia's political stage for the last quarter of a century. Vladimir Putin faces no serious challenger. His fiercest rivals are in exile or in prison. Not that Allah, whose son is fighting in Ukraine, wants any change at the top. Of course I voted for Putin, she says. I trust him. But not everyone who came out today was actually voting. This, one of a string of attacks on polling stations across Russia. They're unprecedented. After chaotic scenes here, an arsonist is detained and green ink poured into a ballot box. The authorities called the attackers scum. Some voters were greeted with a show. Well, it's one way to bang the drum for Russian elections. There is voting too in parts of Ukraine which are under Russian occupation, what Russia calls its new territories. The Ukrainian government called the election here illegal. polls close on Sunday night. Expect a Putin landslide.
Unpredictability is very much a feature of life now in Russia. But that does not apply to elections. The political system here is built around one man, Vladimir Putin, and the Kremlin tightly controls that system, including elections. So Mr. Putin's re-election is not in doubt.
And neither is the message the Kremlin will be sending after this, that Vladimir Putin has the full support of his people. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, in Ukraine, these were the scenes today in the city of Odessa on the Black Sea, the result of the latest Russian missile strikes. The authorities said at least 20 people were killed and more than 70 injured in this residential neighbourhood. Meanwhile, in Russia, there's been shelling by Ukraine of border towns. This is Belgorod. Ukraine has carried out a series of such attacks in recent days. The Kremlin has accused Kiev of attempting to disrupt the Russian presidential election. Well, our correspondent Sarah Rainsford is in Ukraine's capital, Kiev, for us now, and a significant attack this on Odessa, Sarah.
It is. This is the deadliest attack in some time on Odessa, and it is the details that are particularly grim because Ukrainian officials are saying 2 missiles were fired by Russia from Crimea. The first one landed on the city, and it was when emergency teams rushed to the spot that a second missile was fired from Crimea and hit exactly the same place. Now, we know that a medic was killed, a young firefighter was also amongst those killed and injured. Many dozens of people are in hospital. Now, we are being told that those missiles, as they were fired from Crimea, we're saying we don't know what exactly Russia was targeting, but we do know there were some Interior Ministry personnel amongst the casualties. Now, President Zelensky tonight has called this a vile attack. He said Ukraine's military will respond. But I do think it is a stark reminder of what that vote in Russia means for here in Ukraine. Because, of course, more Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin means more war here in Ukraine. It means more missile attacks. It means more days like today in Odessa with dozens of dead and injured.
Sarah, thank you. Sarah Rainsford there. Here, police say that they've now identified the 35 bodies found at a funeral director's in Hull, which is at the centre of a major police investigation. The National Crime Agency has been called in to assist. Detectives have received more than 1,500 calls in the past week from people who've used legacy independent funeral directors. Danny Savage has heard from some of them.
This is Reeta Shaw. She died last October after a short illness. Her husband has her ashes at home. But like so many people in the Hull area who used legacy funeral directors, he's now wondering if they really are her ashes.
You get over the initial part of Reeta passing away. It's hard, but it's this on top of it. If they are Reeta's ashes, it's like torture to the rest of your life, I would have thought.
Police have taken 35 bodies from this funeral home in Hull. They now say they've contacted the families of those people. But Richard is one of 1,500 who've contacted police concerned about the investigation.
And then they says, is there any distinguishing marks on your wife? And I said, yes, my wife had a butterfly on her shoulder. And they asked if they've got any photographs as well of my wife.
This is what we're hearing from many families. They raise concerns, and police ask them if their relative has any scars or tattoos by which their body could be identified.
I thought there's something up here, you know, something very wrong indeed.
This afternoon, people gathered outside one of the 3 funeral homes in East Yorkshire belonging to the company being investigated. Julie says her relative, who she didn't want to name, is one of the 35 bodies found here. You believe that he'd already been cremated?
Yeah, because his son's got his ashes and his son talks to him all the time. What he's been talking to, what always been talking to, he doesn't know now. So, just, you know, I don't know where it goes from here.
How does that leave the family feeling?
Well, devastated, obviously, yeah.
And that appears to be the crux of the issue here. 35 families have been told that their deceased relative's body has now been found on these premises, yet in the past they've been given their ashes or told they can come and collect them. Has there now been a huge mix-up of ashes across this city? For many people like Richard, the distressing uncertainty continues.
And you miss her?
They hope for clear answers soon. Danny Savage, BBC News, Hull.
The US says it's hopeful that some form of order can be restored in Haiti after weeks of violence. Gangs have been running riot, cutting off food supplies and forcing hundreds of thousands of people from their homes. The country's prime minister has resigned and the US has intervened with a plan for an interim council to represent the different political factions in Haiti while an attempt is made to arrange a fresh election. Some food aid has been distributed in the capital Port-au-Prince, and a lull in the fighting has also allowed Will Grant to enter the country, and he joins us now from Cap Haitien. And Will, the scene behind you suggests disorder and chaos.
Yeah, Rita, after a complex couple of days at the border, we're among the first international journalists who've made it into Haiti since the current wave of fighting began, and we've driven a couple of hours to the coastal town of Cap Haitien. Haiti is, of course, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and the additional humanitarian need created by the current crisis is abundantly clear. Some statistics make for very dire reading. 360,000 internally placed people in the country at the moment. 3,000 women due to give birth soon can expect no maternity care whatsoever, so the situation remains critical. USAID, the development arm of the US government, has promised millions of additional aid, and some of that aid is beginning to trickle through now. However, it is nowhere near sufficient for the scale of the crisis, and in the political realm, a transitional council has been named, but the gangs that control Port-au-Prince don't recognize them and have threatened them in some very, very stark language. So Haiti remains mired in a dangerous, complicated mess with the civilian population caught between the politicians and the gangs. Rita.
Thank you very much. Will Grant reporting there. The risk of death from alcohol, drugs or suicide is higher in more deprived areas in the north of England and in seaside towns, according to a new study. Death rates are worst in Blackpool, 6 times higher than the area with the lowest rate, which is Barnet in London. The report is based on deaths recorded by coroners' courts across England. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes reports now from Blackpool.
I'll give my mum again. Yeah. I love that, man.
Paul's had a long struggle with alcohol, but this could be a moment of change.
I need to, man. I need to do it. I know you do.
His support worker has played a key role in getting him this far.
He's more than a worker to me.
But now Paul is about to enter detox, then a stint in rehab.
It's time to move on. Yeah. It's time to live my life a different way. I'm taking it. I'm doing it.
But this is where a lot of our service users hang around. There's a lot of drug using around the town.
Stephen knows exactly what Paul is going through. After all, it's a life he too has lived, and against the odds, has somehow survived.
I didn't know that people recovered. You either went to prison, you got locked up, or you died.
A life of addiction and prison was changed forever by a prison talk given by a former addict.
Morning, everyone.
And Stephen is now part of the lived experience team at the charity Empowerment, staffed by those who've come through addiction and working alongside the local NHS and social workers, trying to help others get clean.
There's now a new thing called nitazines, and I think they're saying that that's like 500 times stronger.
Fatalities related to drink, drugs and suicide, what are known as deaths of despair, are significantly higher in poorer areas, especially in the north of England and seaside towns. And Blackpool has a higher rate of these deaths than anywhere else in England.
We need to listen to people with that lived experience. There also needs to be a really strong focus on prevention, that levelling up of the country to make sure that everyone's got the right conditions to thrive.
But today, a committee of MPs says there are no compelling examples of what levelling up funding has delivered so far, with councils only able to spend a fraction of the money promised to them. The government points to increased spending on mental health and drug and alcohol harm reduction services, plus a suicide prevention strategy. But inequality is stalking the streets of Blackpool.
I started drinking drugs at a very young age, to the point of oblivion sometimes.
So for those like Kate, not her real name, who found herself pregnant, homeless and in the grip of a terrible addiction, the empowerment team are lifesavers.
When I was really bad in addiction to now being clean and having someone there regardless and still wanting to support me, it's an amazing feeling.
I'm not going to let nobody down. Nobody.
Kate and Paul were both at risk of becoming statistics. But with the help of the empowerment team, people who have lived the life, they're beginning the long and difficult road to recovery. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Blackpool.
Motorists are being warned of travel disruption as part of the M25 motorway, which encircles London, is closed for a whole weekend for the first time since it was built in 1986. It's being shut between junctions 10 and 11, with a diversion in place until 6 a.m. on Monday. This is the part that's closing, and it'll affect those travelling to Heathrow or Gatwick airports and to Channel ports on the south coast. Well, our transport correspondent Katie Austin is there for us now. Katie, this is unprecedented. Why are they doing it?
Well, this weekend, a bridge is going to be demolished and a large gantry will be put up, and that's part of major upgrade works. There'll be more closures to come before September. And from a short distance away from where I'm now standing, yes, a particularly busy section of Britain's busiest motorway is now shut until early on Monday morning, and that is likely to mean long delays on alternative routes. As road closures go, it's a very big one.
We tend to forget that the M25 is the biggest bypass in Europe. It's one of the biggest roads in Europe. And this is the first full closure over a weekend that we've ever had on our most important motorway.
Some drivers at Cobham Services today had planned ahead.
We've been up to Essex, we would have stayed over tonight, but what we decided to do was come back straight away.
Are you going to be driving around here at the weekend?
I'm going to try and avoid it now, yeah.
Are you planning on driving this weekend?
Yeah, well, we were, but I'm thinking, we're not sure we might take the train. I think we'll probably end up doing that instead.
Along the diversion route, West Byfleet.
Son and daughter-in-law live in Weybridge, and they normally come around for Sunday lunch, but we said, not this week.
I've put my car away. It's not coming out till Monday morning. I'm not even attempting to go anywhere this weekend.
Local businesses fear gridlock.
Definitely lose money because it's, big areas, so people don't walk to here usually. They do drive. So if they can't drive to us, they will have to drive somewhere else.
4 more closures are planned before September as part of the major programme of improvement works. The advice to motorists this weekend: avoid the whole area if you can, plan ahead and leave plenty of time. Katie Austin, BBC News in Surrey.
The woman who made accusations about Red Bull principal Christian Horner's behaviour is to appeal against Red Bull's decision to dismiss her complaint. The woman who was suspended from her position last week by Red Bull accused Mr Horner of inappropriate and controlling behaviour. She'll ask Red Bull to reconsider its decision, which was made after an investigation conducted by a lawyer. Mr Horner has always denied the accusations made against him. An NHS trust is allegedly using an unproven medical procedure that is said to have harmed patients. A former consultant at the Portsmouth Hospital's NHS trust has told the BBC that the technique, which has been used on patients needing a particular type of kidney dialysis, has led to increases in the rates of infections and blood clots. The consultant who spoke to the BBC was dismissed by the trust for misconduct after repeatedly trying to stop the procedure. The trust said it disputes her findings and that the safety of its patients is its priority. Michael Buchanan reports.
Amanda Kelsey died in 2020. She had kidney problems for much of her life, spending years on dialysis. In 2015, she was offered a procedure that no other NHS trust uses and is considered in several countries to pose a risk to patients.
They've got a technique that they're trialling, is what they said, and it's a technique called buttonholing, and they're going to try it on different patients. Are you happy to go ahead and have a go? So you should go, yeah, if that's going to help.
Amanda's medical records, however, detail a range of complications, particularly infections and blood clots. Many of the problems came after she started using the new procedure, a needling technique called buttonholing. One of the claims the team at Portsmouth have made is that this was requested by patients.
No, not at all.
Over 30,000 people in the UK need kidney dialysis, a process that cleans their blood as their kidneys are failing. For some patients, like Mrs. Kelsey, a piece of plastic tubing called a graft can be inserted into their bodies to aid dialysis. The graft should then be connected to the machine using a technique called rope laddering, according to UK guidelines, where the needles go into different holes each time. But at the Portsmouth Hospitals Trust, they encourage some patients to buttonhole, to insert needles into the same hole each time, a technique not supported by the UK Kidney Association.
It's not really known whether buttonhole needling can safely be used for grafts because it's not generally practiced.
Why is that?
Because of theoretical worry that it might lead to more bleeding or infection.
Patients in Portsmouth weren't initially fully informed of the dangers of the new procedure, and no proper monitoring was set up, according to our later review. When Dr. Jasna Makanovic became aware of the technique in 2016, she immediately objected.
I completely appreciate that my colleagues did not set out to harm patients by introducing buttonholing. But the second when I raised concerns, that very second, the Trust was obliged to start investigations immediately.
Documents Dr. Makanovic shared with the BBC show the efforts the consultant went to stop the procedure. She wrote to hospital bosses and to external regulators, including the Care Quality Commission and the General Medical Council. But though the reviews found there had been problems, they didn't stop the procedure, saying safety concerns were taken into account.
They haven't looked for harm. They have done no audit of the practice. They have done no audit of the complications. They have not reviewed patients' notes.
Shortly before her sacking, Dr. Makanovic did her own audit, reviewing the medical records of those who had been using the controversial procedure. She said the rate of blood clots and blocked arteries was, on average, 3.5 times higher for those patients than it had been when they'd used the recommended needling technique. For Amanda Kelsey, the level of complications was even higher, at least 6 times greater than before.
It's quite upsetting, to be fair.
Mark Kelsey questions if the technique contributed to his wife's death. The Trust said an independent examiner said she died of a stroke and COVID-19. In a statement, the Portsmouth Hospitals University Trust went on, it does not accept that Dr. Makanovic raised evidence concerns of patient harm. The safety and care of our patients is our priority, and we took her objections very seriously. Other options were always explored and offered before this technique was discussed with patients. 2 of the 20 patients who used the procedure are still on it. Jasna Makanovic was awarded £219,000 in damages for being unfairly dismissed by the Trust. Mark Kelsey wants an independent investigation into his wife's death. Michael Buchanan, BBC News.
Tomorrow, a new Welsh Labour leader will be elected to replace Mark Drakeford. The winner, either Vaughan Gething or Jeremy Miles, will take over as First Minister next week. The Labour Party has been in power in Wales for more than 20 years, and interest in its record in government is ramping up ahead of the general election. Our political editor Chris Mason has been talking to the outgoing First Minister.
We are in the very final days. I'm just beginning to get that feeling of things coming to an end. President Clinton said to me, the great thing about being retired is you can say what you like. The problem is nobody wants to listen.
Are you handing over 2 stink bombs to your successor? There's the row with farmers and 20 miles an hour. They've caused quite the ruckus.
Well,
that stink on the farm, a proposed Welsh Government subsidy system demanding environmental measures which could cost around 1 in 10 farm workers their jobs.
It's very frightening and very threatening for farmers to think that that could happen to their businesses and to our rural communities.
Do Welsh ministers, do you think, understand the countryside?
There seems to be an ever-growing divide between urban and rural. Certainly it's very difficult to have a lot of conversations at the moment because everything has got so toxic.
Change is a challenge.
Change that you're imposing?
Well, change that we are navigating. We're not imposing. We are having to explain to people that change is unavoidable and inescapable, even when it is difficult.
And if that means thousands of Welsh farmers are driven out of the industry, so be it?
No, I don't believe for a moment that thousands of farmers will be driven out of the industry.
Let's talk about the default 20 mile an hour speed limit in all built up areas. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people opposing it. Did you misjudge it?
I think we might have done more to explain the reason for the policy. We might have done more to build up to the introduction. It is a policy that will save people's lives.
Let's examine your record on public services and your opponents' observations.
Regrettably, the policies he's pursued here in Wales haven't improved educational attainment, haven't improved the economy, and importantly, haven't brought those chronically long waiting lists down in the NHS.
Never once has Wales met the A&E target of 95% of patients being seen within 4 hours.
No.
Never reached. It's a failure, isn't it?
Well, on those terms, you can say that, but it's a really complex issue. And
is it a complex issue if you're sat there in pain waiting to be seen and you're waiting for more than 4 hours? It's not complex, is it?
No, but you see, many people who wait in hospital to be treated are not sitting there waiting in pain. They're sitting there waiting because they're drunk.
OK, there might be some people there who are drunk, but there'll be an awful lot who aren't.
7 out of 10 people who turn up at an A&E department in Cardiff will be there because alcohol's played a part in them arriving there on a Friday or Saturday night.
So you leave them there for 4 hours so they can sober up?
Well, a more sensible system would not count them.
Are you convinced that Labour's record in government, your record in government, is something that the rest of the UK could look in on and be reassured by?
I think people in other parts of the United Kingdom could look at what we have done and will see some things that they might want to try. That does not mean that you can drag and drop. See, Wales is a different country in that way.
As Labour seek to govern the whole of the UK, scrutiny of its governing record here will sharpen. Chris Mason, BBC News in Cardiff.
Well, as we've heard, tomorrow a new Welsh Labour leader will be elected. Here's my colleague Jane Hill.
I'm in Cardiff for that announcement. Will it be Vaughan Gething or Jeremy Miles who will be the new First Minister? We'll have all the reaction and analysis on the BBC1 bulletins all day from lunchtime.
Now, the annual British Wildlife Photography Awards have produced their usual high standard of entries. Among them, this stunning shot of 2 swans taken at sundown in North Tyneside. There are also frolicking frogs captured at play in Perthshire, an urban fox exposed in the sunlight of Bristol, and this photo entitled Beach for the Sky. But overall, the best photograph was judged to be this stunning image of a deflated football floating near a Dorset beach beset with barnacles.
The ball was found here off of Chesil Beach. It was found by a local beachcomber, and I had the opportunity to get in the water around here. I did take quite a few pictures. As I was snorkeling, I sort of got that split shot view, which you can sort of see the ball on the surface and then another world underneath.
A team of international scientists is carrying out a remarkable experiment in the Arctic Circle to find out if they can stop sea ice from melting as the world gets warmer. They're trying to thicken the ice by pouring salt water on it. Will it help? Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh reports.
It's such a simple idea that it's surprising that no one's tried it before. The team here are pumping seawater on top of the ice so that it freezes and thickens. The aim is to stop, maybe even reverse the loss of Arctic sea ice caused by climate change.
We are pumping around 1,000 litres per minute of seawater. Today we'll add an extra layer, so we'll add probably another 5 to 10 centimetres of ice thickness in this area.
This was the extent of the Arctic sea ice in September 1979. Its sharp decline since then is alarming. So could thickening the ice stop this trend? If not, polar bears and other Arctic sea creatures will lose their homes, and the rest of the world will be worse off, because the sea ice is the air conditioning system for the entire planet.
This is the Centre for Climate Repair.
Researchers here are assessing whether the ice thickening will work and can be implemented across the Arctic in a way that's affordable and practical.
If we just allow the sea ice to go, the Arctic Ocean becomes one of our greatest heat absorbers rather than one of our greatest heat reflectors.
The idea of repairing the climate is a controversial one. If you can fix the damage, so the argument goes, then it's a green light for countries not to reduce their emissions quickly enough. But the researchers here believe that the situation is so dire that there's no alternative but to do both.
If we stop doing efforts and we will leave it as it is, then we will for sure result in a really, really bad scenario.
The researchers expect to know by next year whether their ice thickening has the potential to fix the Arctic and buy a little more time to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
And just a quick update on comic relief. A total of more than £37 million has been raised so far tonight for Red Nose Day. The money goes towards tackling poverty and providing help for people in the UK and around the world. Time now for a look at the weather. Here is Chris Fawkes. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Rita. Well, today has been a day of sunshine and showers. The day's clouds have been gradually collapsing and melting away, leaving still conditions here in the Highlands of Scotland. Now, temperatures for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales were quite close to average. In contrast to that, England had very mild weather, 17 degrees in Santon Down and in Suffolk. That was the mildest place in the country, 6 degrees above average for the time of year. Now, the low pressure that brought the showery conditions is now pushing over into Sweden and Norway, where it's going to be bringing some heavy snow to low elevations. We get a slice of clearer weather ahead of the next Atlantic weather system that's waiting in the wings. And overnight tonight, as that ridge of high pressure builds in, the skies will continue to clear. And for most of the UK, it stays dry overnight with light winds. It's a recipe for a cold night. Frost for Scotland, Northern Ireland and parts of northern England as well. Now, tomorrow morning, you probably get off to quite a nice sunrise across some of these western areas, the rising sun lighting up this lurking cloud. The cloud will quickly bring rain and strong winds back to Northern Ireland, with some splashes of rain getting into Wales and southwest England. Probably not too heavy. Across eastern Scotland, eastern areas of England, after a sunny and cold start to the day, the weather will tend to turn a bit cloudier, but it should stay dry until after dark. Temperatures for most quite close to average, 10 to 12 degrees, but 14 or 15 for southern and eastern England. For Sunday, we've got a